Hello, good morning all. As we get started, first I want to give you an introduction of who I actually am. The meeting that Rosemary and I met at is called the Inland Empire Disabilities Collaborative. I've been a member of a steering committee for that group for about 4 years now. Basically what our mission is to combine efforts of nonprofits and agencies in the Inland Empire that serve people with disabilities to come together as a networking capacity that we can serve the community in a better nature. So we were doing our annual summit in educational fair, and I was actually teaching and speaking at that summit. Also, on a personal note, my wife and I have 2 children with autism, which is a profound reason as to why I do what I do. And for obvious reasons, there's a specific understanding of the marketplace that I'm dealing with because I live it every day of my life. So with that said, kind of jump into it. First slide you'll see is special care. Who are we and what we're doing? So we're going to talk about an introduction to what special care planning is and what I can do to help people directly. Disclosures, 2 disclosures. I am not either an attorney or an accountant, so therefore I cannot offer legal or tax advice, and I have to make that known up front. What is a special care planner? You can read this part of this on the screen for yourself, but essentially we're highly trained people in specific areas in regards to helping families with special needs, children or adults. Over the years, I completed a certification for this program about 2.5 years ago now, and MassMutual created and piloted this designation. Kind of like if somebody becomes a certified financial planner, you go through the American College to get this certification. Same concept. The American College, we created and sponsored this program, so only MassMutual themselves, our agents, are allowed to be a certified special care planner. So, is anyone in here familiar with life care planning? There's a ton of different experts and gurus in life care planning throughout the country. Essentially what life care planning is taking somebody from early childhood, when you find out early on, for example, that your child may be born with autism around age 1.5, 2, all the way down to adulthood, ultimately to where mom and dad are no longer here, and the child has to be cared for by somebody other than themselves. So what you'll see is kind of the 10 different stages related to these comprehensive plannings. First, primary issues. We've got to address what is most important to the individual family, because as you can imagine, every single scenario and every single family has different things they're dealing with. Next would be to create a life care plan vision. Map out what the priorities are for the family and make it in line as far as putting it in writing. Then this next one, choosing a guardian and conservator, is one of the scariest parts, because it's parents making the decision of, okay, if we're not here, who is actually going to take over and take our place? And that becomes a scary thing to think about, because as a parent of a child with special needs, you kind of have a premise that you need to live forever. Number 4, identify financial resources. Walking them through a step-by-step process on a planning basis to figure out what resources they have available in order to meet these goals that they have to accomplish. Determine the life plan cost, which could be astronomical in some cases, but one part of that analysis is helping them establish government benefits through programs such as Social Security, SSI, Medi-Cal here in California, and home supportive services, in the regional centers, just as an example. A big part of the life care planning is getting these government programs in place and helping them understand what it takes to get and maintain those. And in most cases, it deals with fighting through appeals and things like that, because the reality is with the government, as we know, they like to say no first and then consider you later. Number 6 is preparing a letter of intent. This is something I had forwarded to Rosemary ahead of time that she's going to send out to you guys, all the participants. This is about a 15-20 page document, depending upon how much material you put into it, that addresses pretty much all 10 of these different categories all in one place. So it gives a speaking point for the parents to sit down and actually go through all these different steps and determine who it is they want to take over if they're not here, kind of what financial resources they may have, all the way down to the very specific nature of when our child wakes up in the morning, what is their routine with medication, what does it take for them to do their daily routines, because if something happens to parents, it's going to be hard on a child that's typical. So imagine something happened to a parent of a child with special needs and what that has an impact on. It's going to be much more traumatic because their lives are so greatly intertwined. Then you see will, special needs trust kind of go hand in hand. We're going to spend a lot of time speaking on special needs trust, so I won't go into that too much right now. But this number 9 will be one of the most important points. One of the things that happens a lot in circles of planning for families with special needs is that too often you find out that grandma, grandpa, for example, could have great intentions, but they pass away and their state leaves money specifically to the child with a disability. For example, if they die tomorrow and the child with a disability is receiving SSI and they receive $25,000 of inheritance directly, they will automatically become disqualified for the SSI because they would then have a countable resource of $25,000. They would have to spend that $25,000 down to $2,000 or less and then reapply for benefits at that point. And as you can imagine, that creates a bit of a problem for a family living on those benefits. Lastly, you see that it says review the plan annually. Very important to make sure that every year we're looking at the plan that was established, because as life changes, so does the plan. Now this is kind of an example of how the team works. Now I am basically like a quarterback. I facilitate a team of people in support of the individual with the disability and the parent who's providing the care for them. So you'll see people, obviously the next in line is a family caregiver, then you'll see attorney and accountant. These two people are highly important. The attorney especially, because to establish a special needs trust, you have to have a qualified attorney that can create that trust in order to do it. Accountants, there's a lot of things that tax-wise could be deductible. For example, our girls both wear diapers, and 100% of the cost that we spend every year in diapers is deductible as a medical expense at the end of the year. Then you'll see social workers and medical. Social, dealing with the government benefit side. And usually where I come and play here is if I have to be an advocate or in some cases be a jerk to make sure that the family gets what they're entitled to. Because unfortunately, we have to fight as parents almost on a daily basis to make sure that we get what we're entitled to. Next. This is a planning checklist for parents and caregivers. I won't go over this individually. You guys can kind of read through it quickly. But as you can see, for a parent or caregiver, there is a lot involved in this process. So I'm very upfront with people saying that this is not something that we're going to accomplish overnight. But when we get done, in the end, you'll have a peace of mind knowing that if something happened tomorrow, your kid will be taken care of, and you know exactly what that's going to be. So it gives them a peace of mind. These are some of the questions that parents or caring for people with disabilities have. You can kind of read this for yourself. And again, she's going to forward you the PowerPoint so you can look over more detail. Talks about my role. Kind of self-explanatory. My job is to primarily be a coordinator or a quarterback of the financial situation and make sure that everything is kept in line. And then I'll go ahead and read this out loud just for the purposes of the proposal. The single greatest concern of the part of families today who are caring for a loved one with a disability or a special health need from a confirmed diagnosis of the child or loved one's condition is made and a treatment regime is established is what is going to happen to my child after I'm gone. Parents today know that because of advances in technology and medical care, their child will most likely outlive them, which was not the case 20 years ago. Therefore, planning for the future becomes a huge priority for them. As a parent, I can attest to that because prior to really learning specifically about all these different things professionally, my wife and I were kind of scrambling to figure out how to make sense of all the things we were dealing with. So that's the end of that presentation. Now we're going to jump into a presentation on specifically regards to special needs trust, because I know this is one of the major concerns and questions that people have. So here we go. These are going to be a little bit redundant, same disclosures. I cannot give tax or legal advice, same premise. Again, what is a special care planner? We went over that part already. Now, these are some of the reasons listed why people typically establish a special needs trust. It could be born with a developmental disability, congenital, meaning that as you aged, you eventually became to the point where you were disabled and couldn't tend to yourself, traumatic brain injury, so on and so on. This last one on structured settlements seems to be one of the larger causes of the people that I end up helping. I can give an example of a young man that I brought attention to and ended up helping over the last few years. Give me 1 second, I can get some water. Okay, sorry about that. Talking a lot kind of makes you lose your voice. Young man, his name was Aaron Gherkin. We were, about 3 years ago, I had been introduced to his family through the independent living centers as a referral. Aaron was 17 and was on the freeway on a motorcycle, going probably about 55, 60 miles an hour, when suddenly a drunk driver entered the freeway on the on-ramp with the opposite direction, heading straight toward Aaron. Aaron tried to evade him, but ended up hitting him and was thrown from his motorcycle going about 50 miles an hour. Needless to say, he suffered major traumatic brain injury, paralyzed completely and quadriplegic for the rest of his life. There was a huge settlement related to this case. I can't say specific as to what it was, but needless to say, it was in the millions of dollars, right? 3 years after the accident, everything had happened, I was introduced to them to kind of help them make sense of what was going on. Aaron was being cared for by his grandfather at the time, who was 67. And when you're 67, caring for somebody for that age, as you can imagine, is pretty challenging. So by the time I got involved and was there to help, they had a little less than $200,000 remaining in that entire trust account, which started in the millions of dollars of range. Due to the high astronomical cost of care that Aaron required, they had spent almost all the money just purely on giving an hourly care for him because they didn't have any kind of governmental assistance in place. So we came in, got all the assessed, and got it, supportive service, SSI, all the basic government stuff in place. Then his care was then provided for by the government. Did some other related planning. But long story short, we made it so that that money that was in the remaining settlement account became a reserve, and the government was able to provide the assistance that was needed to care for Aaron on a daily basis. So that becomes a huge disconnect in the structured settlements, is because people think they have millions of dollars that, oh, we're good, we don't have to worry about money. But the reality is, without that money being managed properly and with the government helping out, any amount of money is not enough when you're dealing with that situation. So going back to the government benefits, this talks about some basic ideas about the different types of benefits that are available. There's a big difference between SSDI, that's listed on top, and SSI. Pension insurance type versus a needs type. Now, for example, our girls were born with an intellectual disability, therefore they were qualified for SSI essentially from birth because they were born with a disability that it permanently affects them. SSDI is Social Security Disability Insurance. comes from what we earn in our lifetime as people who work typically. Now, people that have worked for, say, 30 years and become disabled as adults then qualify for SSDI based upon the money they earned from their own work record. Essentially, it's like withdrawing from your own Social Security account at an earlier age. Now, SSDI can actually apply to a child with special needs if a parent wants to apply their work record to their child. So when, let's say, a parent is much older and they're realizing that they're going to be passing on, they apply for SSDI for their child, and in turn they can qualify their child under their work record. And even if mom and dad pass away, that child still receives the remaining of the work record benefit under SSDI for that child. So what a parent does is pick between the two, which would have a higher payout for the lifetime of my child, and you do an analysis to evaluate which one makes sense. Did you know that there's something called dual eligibility is what this is talking about. Most cases people are dual eligible for Medi-Cal and Medicare. And then it talks about this asset rule. This asset rule is hugely important. The bottom line is anything over $2,000 in direct assets and you're receiving SSI, Medi-Cal, and other needs-based programs, you will be deemed ineligible for that benefit the moment that asset comes in. You have to eventually get it and spend it down, which becomes a difficult area for parents to be in because you think about our expenses on a regular basis. We pay our rent, our mortgage, all these different things. In a typical checking account, honestly, realistically, if you're receiving SSI for your child with special needs or a disability, you have to have less than $2,000 in your combined accounts at the end of the reconcile period. So within 1 month, you can have $6,000 come into it, but you've got to spend all that money out, and you can never have more than $2,000 sitting in that account because if the government finds out, they can raise heck and they can try to seize your benefits. Now, it talks about how to prevent that. The Special Needs Trust, what it does that makes it so unique is that it's a shelter from these types of problems. So you can have millions of dollars, like we were talking about in the structured settlement, in the Special Needs Trust, but it does not affect your government benefits because the government allows you to do that through the wording in the contract. The strategy part is place your assets in that. Key law to discuss with an attorney. I won't go into this too much. If you guys want to look into more about it, but the biggest thing here is in regards to what it says about a Medicaid payback trust. The majority of special needs trusts are established with this principle, and the reason the government allows you to have it not affect your benefits because at the end, essentially they're going to get their money back by the remaining balances in these accounts, aka it's a Medicaid reimbursement or payback trust. Basically, the hope behind the way a special needs trust should be worked from a structured settlement or something along those lines is that it's a balance where the essentials of life are provided by government benefits and the things that make life enjoyable are provided by the trust. Who should establish a trust? There's two different kinds. There's a first party and a third party special needs trust. This is talking about a third party special needs trust. So this is so like I have my child with a disability, our girls, right? We die tomorrow. It's a third party trust because we're establishing this trust for their benefit, and we are going to fund it should we die through life insurance and other types of proceeds. Once the trust is established, this is what this is talking about. You have to coordinate the available resources, ensure the continuation of government benefits. These are all the different things that we do once it's set and in place. How does it work? Self-explanatory, kind of states it in here. Let's see if there's anything specifically important. trustee. This is important. When you name a trustee, but essentially you're naming somebody to take on responsibility for the money that is in this trust. For example, with Aaron, Grandpa was a trustee. He was given the authority to speak on Aaron's behalf in regards to the money and how it will be allocated. Now, this becomes a risky position for somebody who is not advanced in their understanding to take on, because if the trust disperses money to pay for something that isn't qualified, the government has a right to go in and seize the fund. For example, if you decided that you wanted to go buy a car and decided to make the payments from that trust and it wasn't related to the individual with disabilities, the government can find out and that money can be seized as a complete asset. You can have millions of dollars in that account, but the government can find out that you paid for something that was not legitimate, and they can come in and seize the account. So the balance and how to correct that is naming a personal trustee to handle things that are important to the individual because they know them personally, and then a professional trustee through the form of a fiduciary who's licensed and accredited, or through a trust company such as a Mass Mutual Trust Company, something like that, that can keep an eye on the fund and authorize payments for different things, because then it becomes a check and balance system. If the personal trustee recommends that this car be paid for, and Mass Mutual Trust Company, for example, endorses and approves it, they become liable for it because they allowed it and they approved it ultimately. And if the government seizes the fund, Mass Mutual, a multi-billion-dollar company, then is liable to reimburse that fund and replenish the money that was seized. Therefore, it gives a check and balance and keeps sure that the money is protected. Types of special needs trust. Now, going back to this again, self-settled. This deals with an individual who later in life, for example, became disabled as a result of an accident, something like that, who has assets that make them ineligible to qualify for certain government programs. One second, I need to get some water again. Okay, I'm doing all the talking. I'll take a brief pause. Does anybody have any questions at this point? If you do, just raise your hand, push check or something. Okay, I'll continue then. So going back to the self-settled trust, if you get, as an adult, you become into a disability for yourself, you can take your own assets, create this own a self-settled trust, meaning I decide I'm going to settle my assets into this Medicaid reimbursement trust in order to receive qualification for government assistance. Now, there is rules in regards to this. There's look-back provisions and all kinds of other stuff, which, again, this has to be an individual circumstance because it's too hard to predict in generality what that would mean. It says here, they're primarily set up by a court, meaning that part of a lawsuit, a settlement for an injury, something like that. Aaron's trust, for example, was a self-settled trust because it was created by the court as part of an injury settlement. Trusts are always irrevocable, meaning that they are unable to be changed. And that is what gives them the ability to lock in the asset where it's not acceptable to go and get into it from the outside. After the death is pays Medicaid, like we said before, and we've talked about each of these other things. Third-party trust. Now, this is like a parent establishing a trust for a child. Every single state has different types of laws on how they look at this. It's set up, again, it's irrevocable, cannot be changed, and it's part of an estate plan. My wife and I, for example, when we did our own estate planning, there's a provision within the trust. Every traditional trust and estate plan that you do is pretty similar. The only thing that makes it a special needs trust is a specific chapter of that trust which lays out the provisions for the Medicaid reimbursement and those types of things. So a family, for example, like ourselves, who has 4 children, 2 children who are not special needs and 2 who are, it allows for provisions where each equal percentage is 25% of the combined estate goes to each of the children, but on the flip side, the 25% of the estate that goes to the children who are not special needs allows them to have disbursements, whereas on the other side it's restricted and irrevocable and allows you to do two things at one time, if that makes sense. There we go. Establishing regular payments. A big part of this comes into what I was talking about with, regardless of how large that amount of principal is that you receive. In a lot of cases, it doesn't matter how much the amount is, it's not enough. So what a lot of times, as the structure of settlements and part of these trusts that are established will happen, is we'll have annuities created that will fund lifetime income streams for the individual with the disability. So it allows for a monthly check of, say, $1,000 to come in every month to be funded and owned back to that trust to create an income stream that we know is going to be consistent, guaranteed, and there forever. Part of our complete planning nature for somebody that I help establish these things is looking at taking a budget perspective. What is the overall cost for care, and what does it take for them to eat just regular expenses versus discretionary expenses? And making sure that we have a consistent income provided through these annuities and other guaranteed streams, such as SSI, to make sure that they have that income coming in no matter what, should that principal happen to be depleted. I noticed that somebody else joined. If you can just kind of fill in as we're going. And if you have any questions, go ahead and just raise your hand or hit the check mark, and I'll fill you in where need to be. Getting back to what I was saying, making sure that there's an income to cover the base expenses for what they need to deal with, and then that principal can provide for the extra things. Now, going back to the presence of a trustee and what their responsibilities are, it becomes, as you can see from the things that are listed here, it becomes a bit of a circle, and they've all got to work together as a collective. The family member is going to handle disbursement decisions. Corporate trustees, such as Mass Mutual, is going to handle the investments, record keeping, and reconciling to make sure that disbursements are done properly. Medical and social workers are going to help them understand and make sure the government benefits are maintained and handled properly. And it's got to be done consistently in this order, because it allows for a fluid system that works consistently. Some methods in order to fund a third-party special needs trust, dealing with the one that a parent will provide. Lump sum payments, they can put cash into it. They can do annual payments and simply on a cash basis, or they can fund it with life insurance, which in my experience is the most common. This is personally how my wife and I are funding ours. So lump sum payments, meaning they're going to take a bunch of money each year and put it into that through an investment, so on and so on. Self-explanatory. Annual payments, every year they're putting it in. I should have said that before. Now, funding with life insurance. This is a little more complicated, so I'll explain a little bit. What happens with parents, especially of young children like our girls who are just now turning 9 and 10, we don't exactly have $1 million of cash assets sitting around. And it'd be nice if they did, but it's just kind of not realistic. And our biggest concern is, while we're here, we'll find a way to make sure our girls are taken care of. But when we're not here, that's when there's a real problem. So what we have done personally is we've funded life insurance contracts for both my wife and myself, that should one of the two of us die, the trust is established and the money funnels into that and protects their assets and their benefits and allows the girls to make sure that they're taken care of forever. So this is an analysis going back to what the trust provides and how it should be structured and split up. You're seeing two different sources. On the left, it would be kind of like Maslow's hierarchy needs, the basic level of needs, things that we need to simply live and exist. We got to have medical, we got to have food, we got to have a house. On the right would be the sources and things above and beyond that the government doesn't provide, then in turn the trust can provide. Allow them to be able to go on special, get special gifts, have vacations, and really just have a quality of life. If the trust is working properly, the trust should be providing with a great quality of life and making sure that our kids, when we're not here, have a life that's worth living. That's what's important as a parent. Additional services about a corporate trustee, like for example the Mass Mutual Trust Company, they're going to make sure that you're accountable if the assets are protected. They're going to be a relationship manager, making sure that they're a direct point of contact should the family have a concern or a question. Now we're getting to creating the trust. We've got about 7 slides left, so we'll be done probably in about 20 minutes. So step 1, submit the following. A draft of the document. Now, when you work with the attorney, in a lot of cases they have basically template documents that they use for kind of general purposes for all clients. But what they do with those templates is they take them back and they revise them to make them more specific to what the individual family is dealing with. Go through and create a list of assets, get an idea of what you actually have, what you would want to have named in the trust, and those kind of things. So that would be step 1. The letter of intent that is going to be distributed to you talks about a good part of this, about what assets you have, what liabilities you have, gives you a bit of a perspective about starting to compile a list for these things. And if there's anybody who's had individual questions about doing these things, I can walk them through about how to create it. Step 2, once the draft is together, the assets are kind of listed, you get everything together to determine who's going to administer the terms of the trust. This would be the trustee for the personal reasons and also the trust company or the nonprofit trustee. A good example of how that works is there's a group out here called Master Trust of California that is part of a pooled special needs trust. This is one thing that isn't really listed anywhere in these PowerPoints or talked about. What a pooled trust is people, for example, that are clients of Inland Regional Center, they have their own master trust created to pool assets for people with special needs who cannot directly afford to go meet with an attorney, create their own trust and everything else. So instead they can sign a joinder agreement into this pooled special needs trust, place their assets under that pooled trust, still have direct access to those assets, but it becomes managed by a nonprofit entity. So in order to receive those assets, you make a request either through a fiduciary or in some cases where the individual with disability is able to speak for themselves, they can request to get some of that money back out, and then the nonprofit group can release some of those funds back to you for essential needs. The benefit in using a pooled trust would be the fact that in a lot of cases people can't simply afford to create their own, and it becomes a good alternative for somebody in that position. So that's something unrelated to what we're looking at, but something I needed to include. Again, going back to the trust company, let's listen to the second bullet point. They regulate terms, meet with the advisor. The ones that I have established that are working most effectively, the trust company is the administrator directly. So instead of every single day that the client would have a concern about what assets they can take out, they have a direct point of contact in the trust company where they can call and ask about if they can pay for this, how it would work, and they can work together as a collective pretty much on a daily basis because there's somebody assigned directly to it to help them through all these different things. Because personally, if I've got 100 different clients, it's too hard for me to manage on a daily basis everybody individually, as you can imagine. Step 3, once all the terms are accepted, everything gets executed, signed, and then goes out. Now, once this stuff is all executed and created, it's very important that your surrounding family knows everything that was created. So grandma and grandpa, for example, that want to leave money to your child with a disability, they need to know that the trust was created, because in their own estate plan, they have to name that trust to be where the money would be left. Therefore, the kid can receive the money, and it doesn't affect the benefits they're receiving. for fiduciary. This is kind of just a statement from a judge that actually was one of the originals who helped created the law for the special needs trust. As in regards to professional fiduciaries, in recent years, I would say the last 5 years, they have become much more regulated. Fiduciaries in the past were not required to be licensed, could basically represent a senior citizen, for example, without any formal certification to do so. And what they found over the years is that these fiduciaries were actually, naturally, were ripping off senior citizens and people with disabilities because they can't speak for themselves, yet somebody had all the control over their money. So now with the regulations and the licensing, a fiduciary is actually a secure place for somebody to seek counsel. There's a couple ones in particular that I work with. The main fiduciary, she handles people who are SSI recipients and things like that, and charges a nominal fee of $24 a month to manage their financial affairs, basically. And for $24 a month, that's quite a deal because in probably 90% of cases, people who are receiving those benefits are not equipped enough to handle it themselves. Again, going back to my role, as you can see, there's a lot. Really, when it comes down to the third bullet point, is my job is to coordinate a team of people and make sure that everybody does it right to protect your child properly. That's my biggest concern, my personal reason for doing what I do, because I want to make sure that the child with a disability or adult with a disability is protected. And to me, that's the most important part, because I live to make sure our girls are protected, and that is what matters to me. Most importantly, choose somebody, obviously, that you trust and that you have a rapport with, that you know that can specialize and understand this field. Unfortunately, this is a very narrow field of expertise. In Southern California, for example, Inland Empire, there's 2 people that have this certification, myself and one other. Orange County region, we have about 3 other people. As a combined in Southern California, I believe we have between 25 and 50 as a collective that have completed this certification. Now, as far as CPAs and attorneys go, there's a lot of the CPAs and attorneys that claim response about Northern California. I'm not sure of the individual statistics. I know there is people out there certified to do it. If you guys want connections for somebody in Northern California, we have a database of people that are certified for different reasons, so I can get it. We can distribute it in an email. As far as attorneys and CPAs go, there's a lot of people that claim to have a specific understanding of a special needs trust, and you'll find most estate planning attorneys will say they know how to do it, but have probably done one in their entire career. What I did initially when I started working in this market was I interviewed 10 law firms here in Riverside directly, and after interviewing 10 law firms, I found 2 that could actually do it and handle it properly. Ours was drafted by a firm named Bentler Mulder, based out of Riverside. Chris Mulder is an established estate planning attorney. He's been doing it for 25 years, and has drafted about probably a little over 1,000 special needs trusts over his career. So obviously, the more you do, the greater understanding that you have as to how this works. So I'd rather have somebody create my trust who actually understands that part of law well, if that makes any sense. Last slide. Thank you, and we'll help you get there. So I think I've pretty much covered everything we had said to be covered. So at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions if anybody has any, and then I will try to address them directly.
I was wondering, do you have office in Northern California?
I don't directly have a place out there. I'm licensed to represent people in the entire state, but there is people who live directly in Northern California that I can connect you to if you wanted to meet with somebody in person out there.
Okay, very well. I have a consumer who already has an attorney creating or filing an application for counselor, and I was wondering what will be your role, like you were saying, if this person already has an attorney for this matter or for the entire um, process that you are discussing right now.
Well, I'm not an attorney directly, so basically what I do is I help facilitate to make sure that all the documents that are created and everything are done properly. We have, our trust company has full-time staff attorneys that their job is basically to review documentation. So in a case like what you're talking about, where they're really working on all the documents created, what I would do is I would compile the trust and everything that was created, and I would forward it to our estate planning team and have them review it to make sure it's all done legitimately and properly. And then at that point, once it's done and created, my role becomes helping them make sure that how it's funded and making sure the money that is related to that trust is handled properly. Because one of the problems is in a lot of cases like the young man I was talking about, Aaron, it doesn't matter what the principal and the amount of money is that goes into it. Unless it's managed properly, there's a great chance that the money can run out. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
And then I'm sure Rosemary is going to send out my contact info when we get done with this entire thing, too. So if you guys want to talk individually about something you're dealing with, then you guys can give me a call directly, and I can help you in individual circumstances.
When looking for a qualified person, what's the exact title one looks for? Quote, special needs, question mark, quote.
As far as Mass Mutual, our official title is Special Care Planner. In regards to attorneys and CPAs, they give themselves all kinds of different titles. And really the way to find out if they're accredited is you can do checks with the Better Business Bureau and things like that. And the best place to check is with your regional centers. Regional centers have a list of people that are qualified, especially on an attorney basis, to handle special needs trusts and things like that. So if you check in with their liaison, they can point you in the direction of who you should be talking to who's formally accredited to deal with it.